on the NewsChannel 5 network. This is OpenLine.
Hello everyone, welcome to OpenLine on Thursday night. Hope you're having a great night, everybody. I think we have a very interesting show, a bill that is making its way through the legislature. It's gotten a lot of attention, and it's a very well-pointed bill. This bill would allow adoption agencies to deny services to gay couples. It has passed in the House. We are going to talk about this bill. What do you think? And we are happy to have with us Chris Sanders with the Tennessee Equality Project. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Ben.
We also want to hear what you think.
Sure.
But first, let's get a sense of what this bill does.
Yep.
So educate people where it stands and more specifically, what does it do?
Right. If people want to look up the bill on the legislature's website, it's Senate Bill 1304. And this bill would basically codify the fact that private adoption agencies cannot be refused a license from the state just because they have a written policy that turns people away based on religious or moral objection. They can't be refused state grants or contracts just because they have a written policy that turns people away based on moral or religious objections. And the agency cannot be sued for those kinds of actions. So that's the bill in a nutshell. So the word gay is not used in the bill, and the sponsor himself would say that, but that is the impact, or part of the impact. It also hits a lot of heterosexual couples, families.
So the word gay is not even in the bill.
That's right.
But so a moral objection. So if you had a moral objection to short people, then you wouldn't have to adopt.
That's right.
You wouldn't have to let them adopt.
Or a couple of whom one spouse was previously divorced. Or let's say that the couple is made up of someone who's an evangelical and someone who's not religious. That might not be enough for the agency. In other states, we've seen examples of where Catholics and Jews have been turned away from private adoption agencies. And of course, one of the most important parts for us is that this discrimination could be state funded if this bill became law.
And now explain that, because it says private adoption agencies, so how could it mean state funded agencies? What is that? How does that work?
In section 1C of the amended bill, it talks about grants and contracts, and the state could not refuse to let these private agencies apply for grants and contracts from the state. And when you see grants and contracts, put $signs there instead, because that's what those are. Just because the agency turns people away based on moral and religious objections.
What do you think, if this were to pass, what would it mean for adoptions in Tennessee? What is the practical impact?
Well, it would mean that more money might be flowing to private adoption agencies and flowing to those agencies that want to turn people away. It might mean more private adoption agencies would open in Tennessee because they would then be eligible for state funds. It would mean private agencies that never before thought of taking state funds, if they hit a rough year financially, might decide to apply for contracts and grants. So while the percentage of agencies may be small right now that would turn our community away, or turn Catholics or Jews or non-evangelicals away, that part of the sector could grow substantially with state incentives.
And is that what you think would happen? Because that would be the question. What does this mean for gay couples who want to adopt? And how many agencies right now would say, okay, I have a moral objection, a religious objection to, to adopting a child to same-sex couples?
Well, I don't know how many would say that now versus in the future. But what we do know is the bill was brought by the Baptist Children's Foundation or Home, and they regard homosexuality as sinful. So there's a direct line between who has an interest in the bill advancing, and an effect on our community. So we don't know what the adoption landscape would look like if this bill became law. All we know is who the interested parties are right now, and the fact that there would be taxpayer funds involved. We don't know who would end up with them down the road.
And you said this has happened in other states, or kind of what else is behind this? How many other states do something like this? And you're mentioning a group that's kind of behind this bill. Kind of what's the background on this bill?
Well, there's further background on it in that it's part of Project Blitz, which is a legislative kind of blueprint that comes out of the Congressional Prayer Caucus, which is not an official arm of the Congress of the United States, obviously. And this is an effort to inject certain kinds of religion into public life, and particularly at the state level. So there are a number of states that have passed these. Most recently, Oklahoma and Kansas have passed similar adoption bills. But Project Blitz is a much bigger effort that does things like pass bills that say, "In God we trust" must be displayed in our public schools. And of course Kentucky has looked at that. We've passed it here, and I assume that's been implemented over the last year in our schools. So it's this sort of wide project. This bill is one piece of a larger effort. We've
seen another big issue is abortion that divides everyone. There was the heartbeat bill.
Right.
And that's going to be challenged and has been challenged. There's another one of these bills that's put out there in a bunch of different states, passes in some states, then there's a legal challenge.
Right.
If this were to pass, would there be a similar legal challenge? What happens if this passes?
Well, it would go into effect, first of all. And I think private adoption agencies would begin applying for these funds and possibly discriminating. In Michigan, there has been a settlement. Their state had been providing taxpayer funds to some private adoption agencies that turned people away, and the state has settled that in federal court. Now, it was federal district court, but the important thing here, Ben, is that Michigan is in the same U.S. federal circuit as Tennessee. So if this case percolates up further, it could set precedent for how we determine the law in Tennessee if it's challenged in Tennessee, if were it to pass.
And that's often the motive. You're trying to set precedent, and they're sending these things out to try and get a court to make a ruling.
Yes. Now, I will assure you that our efforts at fighting the bill are not trying to set precedent. We would rather not have to fight this in court. We would rather it not pass the legislature to begin with.
And what is the landscape now? How do you know how many gay or same-sex couples are adopting children? Kind of what is the situation now?
I don't know. I do know that it is a number, and what I have heard from the Movement Advancement Project, who collects data on LGBTQ issues, and I believe also the Williams Institute at UCLA says there is a higher percentage of same-sex couples adopting and forming families in the South as opposed to other parts of the country. And it may be surprisingly to many, maybe our opposition, that we retain that Southern sense of family values and family connection here, and we actually have more in common with the heterosexual couples and individuals in terms of how we think of family than maybe in other parts of the country. Not sure.
And so if we get a caller who says, I disagree with that, I don't think same-sex couples should be allowed. And that has obviously been debated.
Well, you can think what you want. It's another thing to put it into the law.
Right. What would you say to that caller? And we may get that caller, but let's kind of, what do you think, and I guess what you would say to anybody who questioned that, whether it you know, in the law or whatever, what would you say?
Well, I would say, first of all, that the studies are clearly showing that same-sex couples are doing a great job of raising children. There have been some studies that even say quite recently that children raised by same-sex couples perform better academically. I'm not going to make that claim universally, but you know, that's where the studies have headed. And then I would turn around and ask, what is your assumption behind saying we shouldn't adopt, we shouldn't form families? We have love to give. We are responsible adults. Anyone who has tried to adopt can tell you what a rigorous process it is. There's the home study. There are the background checks. There are all the interviews. They're checking out the people you know. It's a long, grueling, emotionally draining process. Anybody who goes through that and comes through with flying colors objectively based on the criteria that are set forth, it shouldn't matter what gender that person is or the couple is. They proved themselves. So don't add ideological, extra moral, and religious hoops for them to go through.
And this stands, okay, we're kind of setting the table here. This stands where right now? So it's passed in the House.
That's correct.
And so it passed, what was it, 67-22 it looks like. So that's pretty handily.
Oh yeah.
Passed in the House, and now it goes before the Senate, right?
Yes, it's starting its process in the Senate, maybe. It has been referred to the Senate Judiciary Committee, the last calendar of that committee, but we're not quite sure when that's going to be. So could be any time. Our hope is, of course, that the Senate will decline to run it this year or ever.
And what about the governor? We have a new governor, Bill Lee. Has he made a comment on this?
His comment is that comments are coming, I believe.
Okay. So he hasn't, at this point, you would say he hasn't taken a position? Would that be a fair thing?
Not a public position that I'm aware of. That's how I'll put it.
Okay. All right. Fascinating. All right, so now we're going to go to break, and we're going to open up the phone lines. What do you think? What questions do you have? There's the number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. Take a break. Be back right after this.